Hey there, it's a gorgeous day.
It is, and I spend all of it either sleeping or inside taking notes for this
Yes,
episode.
me too. Me too. That's exactly what I did.
I went out to the garden yesterday, I was telling you, and I had some nice greens growing. I'm like, oh, let me go out and water them. And somebody had come by and nibbled on most of them. So I
Okay.
immediately got out the blood meal.
Yes. No, that would be the end of that creature, as far as I was concerned. My dad used to shoot BBs at squirrels, trying to get into the bird feeder.
Oh, see, that's mean.
Well, he grew up hunting, and shooting raccoons out of trees, not for sport, but for food, because this was right after the Depression.
Yeah.
And
food is fine. It's the for sport or the just cause.
No, it was not for sport. And actually, my mom kind of came down on him, and so he just started chucking stuff at the squirrels instead. But he didn't want to come off as being pro-gun, but he really didn't want the birds, suffering. So,
I mean, but birds also eat insects. They don't rely on humans.
I know, yes. Well, welcome to Goodnight, Mr. Holmes, a podcast about the Granada Sherlock Holmes, which ran on ITV in the UK between 1984 and 1994, and ran on Masterpiece Mystery in the US around the same time. I'm Laura.
And I'm Rachel.
Today, we are looking at episode 1 in the series called The Return of Sherlock Holmes, which is called The Empty House.
This was first published in Collier's in 1903.
Oh, not The Strand.
No. And actually, it looks like it was first published in the US.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, because this is a big story.
Yeah.
Wow. That's surprising.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
I wonder if the Strand was mad. So the episode begins with Watson, and I think it's the narration in this piece is David Burke.
It sounds like Edward Hardwicke.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Yeah.
They're very similar voices.
Yeah, they do.
But he's recounting Sherlock Holmes's death alongside Moriarty at the Reichenbach Falls, and we see the death scene again, and then we're looking at the darkened front door of 221B.
And then the title of the episode comes up over that, The Empty House.
Yes, so we're meant to think that 221B is the empty house. But one thing I hadn't noticed is that on the first floor next to 221B, there's a luthier shop. A luthier builds and fixes stringed instruments.
Oh.
So that must have been handy for Holmes when his
That's why he chose 221B as his address.
There used to be a luthier shop on Forest Avenue in Staten Island where like the Philharmonic would bring their instruments and stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they restrung a guitar for Olivia one time. It was really cool.
Very cool.
So then we see Dr. Watson writing up his account in his surgery office.
Yeah, Dr. Watson is fully Darren. Darren, that is a reference to Darren from Bewitched.
Yes.
Who was played by, I believe it was Dick York in the first season, and afterwards by Dick Sargent, with nobody in the show commenting.
Yeah, and it's the same deal here. So, but Edward Hardwicke, like the other Darren, is going to remain at Jeremy Brett's side for the rest of all the episodes. Mm-hmm. And there's a solo violin playing a melancholy version of the theme song. As Watson tells us, it's been 3 years since Holmes died. He's packing up his doctor's black bag and leaving his new surgery, which is near 221B, because he walks past it. Mm-hmm. And he tells us he's supplementing his practice by working as a police surgeon.
Kensington, isn't it? His practice?
Well, I think in the stories it is, but
he calls. Yeah, but he later in the episode, or actually, maybe it is at this point. He is in front of 221B and hails a cab, and then tells the driver Kensington.
Oh, that's when he's
the next time we see him, it's in his office.
No, actually, the next time we see him, he's going to this beautiful house in the West End.
Yeah, but the
okay,
the sequence I was talking about.
Okay, yeah, it's a little, I don't know, I read that sequence differently, but yeah.
Or maybe I'm remembering it wrong. You're right. Who knows? Some part of this takes place in Kensington.
Yes. So he's
Yes, both of us did take notes on this episode.
Are we really watching the same one? He goes to the West End. It is a gorgeous house. Lestrade is waiting for him upstairs in the library. Again, I'm jealous of the library. I'm always jealous of the libraries. And he's next to the corpse of the Honorable Ronald Adair. Adair was 23. He's the second son of the Earl of Maynooth, which doesn't exist, who is a governor of one of the Australian colonies. The Count
Australia became its own nation in 1901.
Right. Okay. So and this is like 1880,
83, 84.
80. Well, it would have had to been after 1885 for reasons we'll get to.
I think the actual date that they give is earlier, but yeah, not like consistency is a thing.
Yeah, not Conan Doyle strength. So the Countess is in London for the season, and Ronald and his sister live in this townhouse with her. Lestrade says it's not a suicide because there's no weapon. Next to the corpse.
But to quote Monty Python, maybe he simply shot himself and then hit the gun.
Yes, I know. I mean, it's entirely possible that someone could commit suicide and someone else could come in and take it.
Yes, true. That is very true.
But Lestrade has found a soft-nosed bullet, which is kind of melted. And Watson...
Soft-nosed bullets are intended to expand upon striking flesh. So
And
they're primarily used for hunting.
They were outlawed for warfare by The Hague in 1899.
Yep.
So Watson notes it's unusual for a pistol to have the kind of velocity that would exercise that kind of force. And it would be more normal if it had come from a rifle.
And Lestrade says, yes, in that tone that you use when you don't actually know what that person is talking about, but you don't want to admit that you don't know what they're talking about.
But they conclude it's murder. Adair was sitting at the desk counting out a lot of money, but the money's still on the table. So that wasn't a motive for the murder. And we see young Adair the previous night playing cards at his gentleman's club, which is a smoke-filled room, and again, lined with books. And I'm like despairing for these books with all this smoke hanging in the air.
Yeah.
With men in white tie, and there's plenty of bourbon being passed around. And one of the players says, time for one last round. And another says, oh, yes, indeed. Now we can get our revenge. And Adair looks kind of uncomfortable. And I noticed that one of the men looks distinctly like Lord Lucan, who disappeared in 1974, which is 12 years before this episode aired. And Lucan was a gambling addict.
That's really funny.
With the ironic name of Lucky. Who killed his children's nanny, thinking that it was their mother, because he was trying to kill their mother, and then disappeared completely. And this
has never been seen from since. Nobody what happened.
This would have been in the minds of a lot of viewers because it was just 12 years earlier.
Yeah.
And it kind of casts a foreboding vibe over the whole scene.
Very cool.
The whole story of Lord Lucan is just off the chain.
Yeah.
Adair returns home. He takes off his tie. He goes with his winnings to the desk in the library, and he begins doing his accounts. And he's fidgety, and then his hand suddenly jerks. And his mother comes up the stairs, presumably to say goodnight. She's in her robe, which is a really frilly kind of white thing. She knocks on the door, but it's locked. She gets a couple of servants, but they can't get him to come to the door, so they break it down. And then we get a lovely shot of the Countess's fillings as she screams.
And it just kind of stays on her, but not in like freeze frame or anything in that 80s kind of way of something bad has happened.
And how much air does she have in her lungs that she can keep that scream going? So Watson and Lestrade note that the window's open, but there's no signs of an intruder. There's this magnificent set of tiebacks that's holding the curtains open. And the furniture in the library is this highly polished, cherry-stained, gorgeous, sumptuous. Watson and Lestrade note that it's a straight drop down the window, so whoever committed this crime, they laugh, must have been a monkey or had wings. And Watson says he'll do an autopsy that afternoon, and they say goodbye.
Yeah, Watson first suggests that, oh, maybe the killer came in through the window, and it's like flat.
Yeah.
Unless you're suggesting it was Spider-Man who came in to kill him. I think they came in through the window.
So then we're at the inquest. The Countess is all in black. She's sitting next to her daughter. Watson, presumably for whom she has come to London for the season.
Mm-hmm.
And so this murder like wrecks the daughter's chances for that season. Watson is called to the stand for his testimony. Watson says the death was caused by a bullet from a .45 caliber revolver, and the judge admonishes him to stick to the facts and that the caliber was speculation. Okay. So the bullet penetrated the skull above the left eye, went through the brain. Death was instantaneous. The bullet would have traveled 4 or 5 feet. Death occurred between 10:30 and 11:30 at night. And the next witness is one of the card players, an old school friend of Ronald's. And
the judge, whenever he gets to talk to Watson, is like, "Thank you, doctor," and stares at his paper for a moment. It's like, Watson, like, you're really familiar with these strange non-Anglo-Saxon names.
So this next witness is a cricket player on the Harrow 11, or former. So Adair and this guy went to Harrow together.
Yeah, Harrow is a boarding school for teenage boys, essentially. It was, according to its website, founded in 1572 under a charter granted by Queen Elizabeth. Pictures of the interiors make it look a lot like Hogwarts.
Yes. It's a rival to Eton. Benedict Cumberbatch went to Harrow.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So this guy attests that Ronald was a good sportsman, as straight as a die, one of the most popular fellows I know. And then comes Ronald's godfather, Sir John Hardy, who's the trustee of the estate. He testifies that Ronald's death is an appalling tragedy, and at this, the Countess is in tears. It's clear that she loved her son very much, which is a point in his favor. He says that he sponsored Ronald for the gentleman's club called the Bagatelle because he thought Ronald would enjoy playing cards. And the judge asked if Ronald was affected by either winning or losing. And the godfather said he never played such high stakes that either winning or losing could affect him at all. And we see this Lord Lucan guy paying very close attention to this. And the trustee explains the family fortune is a very large one, so any gambling would have been easily covered. And then comes the Lord Lucan guy. His name, we find out, is Colonel Moran. And those of us who are Sherlockians know.
Yes.
There's no wonder he looks so sinister. This guy has a chin that, like...
Yeah, he has a chin. There's, in season, I think, 4 of Cobra Kai, Martin Kove's character is... given this sort of subtle insult, another character saying, "My, what a magnificent Habsburg jaw you have."
Yeah.
Like, this guy really has a Habsburg jaw.
Oh, he does. It's very pointy, too.
Yeah, the Habsburg family ruled Austria-Hungary for many years and were famously incestuous.
And the portraits, and the portraits were supposed to be complimentary.
Yeah, you can really see it in the portraits.
Oh, my God. No, and there was one of them, like, he couldn't even close his mouth. The jaw was so out of whack.
Yeah.
So Moran says he didn't know Ronald well. He and Ronald's father used to play polo together in India. And he says that Ronald was a charming boy. Just the stamp of fellow I'd like to see joining my old regiment. And when he asked if Ronald seemed worried or upset, Moran said no. He doesn't think Ronald had an enemy in the world. And finally, Lestrade is on the stand. And he gives the diagnosis of willful murder by person or persons unknown. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, the audience gasps, like, this wasn't blindingly obvious. What did you think he was going to be saying?
Right. Why was he even there? So Watson's leaving the inquest. He's rushing to get a cab, and he knocks past an old man carrying...
And I think that's how it's described in the story, but... by knocks into what actually happens is that the bookseller tosses a book onto the ground in front of Watson just as they pass each other.
Right.
And then Watson picks it up, apologizes, and the bookseller just like grabs it back and waves, flails his arms at Watson in a go away gesture.
Right. Yeah, it's a very funny scene.
Yeah.
And Watson says, I think it's not too greatly damaged. So he's back at his surgery. He's going through some papers when the maid.
Here's where Watson tells the cab to go to Kensington.
Okay. So in the surgery, Watson's going through these papers. The maid knocks on the door, and I noticed her name is Ivy, which is the name of Watson's maid in BBC Sherlock in The Abominable Bride. And they even look kind of alike, the actresses.
Oh, that's funny.
And she says there's a gentleman there to see him, and Watson's asked if it's urgent, if the man gave his card, and the maid says no, and Watson scolds her for letting the man in during non-consulting hours.
And I told you once, I told you 100 times, my
Yes.
consulting hours are plainly displayed outside. And Ivy's like, yeah, but literacy rates around here are not really good.
And then this old man comes barging in, and it's the guy with the books. Watson indignantly says, I'm exceedingly busy. And the old man says, of course you are. And the old man apologizes for being irritated outside of the inquest. Watson says he's making too much of it. He begins to sit down, thinking the man will leave. But
Yes, now if you'll excuse me. And the
man
bookseller
does not
says, oh,
leave.
I'm in no great hurry, and closes the door.
Yes, he closes his door to the consulting room and remarks that he has a bookshop on the corner of Church Street, and sits down and begins to try to sell some of his books to Watson.
Yeah, he's reading off the titles like it's the first time he's ever seen them.
Yeah, yes. So he takes off his hat. He's wearing a visor underneath the hat. He's got a huge wart on his nose and brown teeth. And he notes that Watson's bookcase.
Facial hair too, I think, or eyebrows or something.
Something, yeah. And big, like mutton chop sideburns.
Yeah.
He notes that Watson's bookcase looks a little untidy. And Watson goes over to have a look as if he's
exactly. Like he's never noticed this before. I have a bookcase.
And as his back is turned, the man takes off his disguise. Of course, it's Sherlock Holmes.
And he does it like we can see his reflection in the window of the cabinet doors. And like, he essentially just pulls something over his head. Like all he would have to do is like Clark Kent taking off his glasses and Lois Lane is like, oh my God, you're Superman. This would take him at least half an hour to get all that makeup off his face.
Plus, underneath, he's in a suit with a scarf, and looking very dapper, I must say. So Watson turns around, and Holmes asks if Watson minds if he smokes a cigarette. And he reaches his arms out, presumably kind of like he's going to give him a hug.
Mm-hmm.
But Watson faints. And Holmes revives him with brandy.
So of course it revives Watson. Watson's like, brandy? Yeah,
I'll wake up for that.
It's a little over, at this point in the episode, it's a little over 16 minutes with just Watson in the episode. And that does kind of track with the original story. But I also think it was very smart of the show to keep it that way, because it does give us time to get used to having a new Watson by the time we see Holmes again.
That's very true. Yeah, that's a good detail. So Holmes is apologizing profusely, and Watson's just incredulous. He's not angry, he's not resentful, and I think in this case the BBC Sherlock got it right, because I would be pissed.
Yeah, I would too. And like there was no way they were going to have Watson punch Holmes in the face. But I think even if they were tempted, the fact that they have a new Watson would have meant that they couldn't.
Yes,
because it would have turned people against the new Watson.
Exactly. Yes. So this Watson is just grateful and overjoyed that Holmes is back, and insists that Holmes sit down and tell him how he survived. And at this point, Holmes stretches dramatically.
And I have that note too. And then I got up from the couch after I was done taking notes and did exactly the same stretch.
So Holmes says it was hard work pretending to be a shorter man for hours on end. And then he gets serious at saying, we have a hard and dangerous night's work ahead of us. Again, presuming that Watson is ready to just follow it like before. And in fact, Watson is ready. When you like, where you like. And Holmes gives a ha and says, just like the old days. And honestly, the chemistry between these two actors is on fire.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember an earlier time rewatching it. It was towards the end of the episode that I was suddenly like, this is the first episode these two actors have had together. Because it doesn't feel that way. It feels like there's this whole long history between them.
Yes. It's really remarkable. And you can tell they really enjoy being together in the same room.
Yeah.
Their faces are so happy. And Brett is not just chewing the scenery, he's devouring it. And Hardwick is happy to let him do it. And Holmes says, we might have a chance for a mouthful of dinner before we go on, which is so kind of Holmes. And we see that he's something of a changed man.
Yeah.
He's a little more empathetic than he used to be, and he's missed Watson so keenly.
Yeah.
And Watson, meanwhile, says, dinner, of course, but first you must tell me everything, which he's a changed man too.
Right.
In more ways than one.
Yeah, and Holmes asks if he's all right.
and he's been grieving, and he just wants to continue. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a nice little joke. And then Holmes is like, also, you look a little different than I remembered. You like gain some weight or maybe go a little gray. Like, I just don't remember you looking like this. And Watson said, well, he's been gone a long time.
And then Holmes says, about that chasm, I had no serious difficulty getting out of it for the simple reason that I was never in it. So his note to Watson, which is left on the rock by the falls, was genuine. Moriarty did give him the courtesy of letting him write the note, which
I still think that's like the dumbest thing.
I know, yeah, gentlemen criminals. And at this point, Watson shows him that he's framed it.
Yeah, there's a pause in the flashback, and Watson walks over to the wall, and I was sitting on the couch going, yeah, I've got it framed. He does, in fact, have it framed.
And he says it's his most treasured possession.
Aww.
Now, the note itself was written on 3 little sheets of paper. So, and the note that Watson is showing Holmes is 1 piece of paper in a frame. So in my mind, like
together,
he's lined up, the 3 pieces of paper and made it.
And he was like, well, I had to rewrite it a little bit to get it to fit on 1 piece.
So Holmes compliments him on writing the death scene. Again, a notable change from when he used to criticize Watson's writing.
Yes.
And we see him back at the falls, taking off his deerstalker. Moriarty's hat is knocked off by a branch. They grapple at the falls. And Holmes at this point tells Watson that he knows Baritsu, which is basically a form of mixed martial arts, which was it actually was real.
Yeah, he describes it as as Japanese wrestling.
It's not.
Yeah, the founder of Baritsu is an Englishman who was born in India.
Yes.
I mean, there's some Japanese martial arts mixed in there, but it's not Japanese wrestling.
The nearest parallel that I've been able to find is Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's got leverage on Moriarty physically, and we see him tossing Moriarty off the cliff.
Moriarty goes.
But he wasn't out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively. He knew that at least one of Moriarty's men would be coming after him in retaliation. So
for those keeping track of inconsistencies that the author didn't care about, Mycroft had sent a telegram saying the entire net was captured.
Yes, that's right. I forgot about that. But he's saying it's necessary to fake his own death because of this one person. And he climbs back up to the top of the falls to a place where no one can see him. And from there, he sees Watson yelling for him. He starts to call to him, but then he doesn't. I mean, this is just a poignant scene.
Yeah.
He watches Watson find the note, sees Watson's agony, and then come the police. And he says, I watched you and your followers investigating in the most sympathetic and inefficient manner the circumstances of my death. And then he watches Watson and company leave. And
yeah.
go ahead.
um, Watson had been asking about the two tracks that went down
Mhm.
and none went out. And we cut to Holmes climbing up a cliff face, I guess somehow having teleported to
Yes.
the cliff face, and saying, I'm not a fanciful man. But he thought that several times during that climb, he could hear Moriarty's voice screaming at him from out of the pit. Help, I'm caught on a rock.
Right. And honestly, I'm amazed that Brett didn't sprain an ankle in that climb.
Oh my God. And running through the forest.
Yes.
What he did, I would have sprained an ankle running through the forest. I sprained an ankle walking across an intersection in New York City.
I mean, I would have had to borrow ankles to sprain at this point. It's just, the network of tree roots that's kind of holding up the cliff, and it's really a complicated, and it's a real, like, this isn't a set.
Yeah.
So he climbs away from this hiding place, literally dodges a bullet, realizes that Moriarty had not been alone. His escape had been witnessed. He dodges another bullet and takes off over the mountains in the darkness. A week later, he was in Florence, safe in the knowledge that everyone thought he was dead. I don't know how he's safe in that knowledge if Moran,
if clearly there's some important Confederate who knows that he is not dead. Like, why are you in hiding?
And he confesses that he did have one confidant, Mycroft, because he needed Mycroft to send him money to live. And Watson's very deeply understanding of this. Holmes was counting on Watson.
Well,
later he gets a little, but Holmes was counting on Watson's account to broadcast to the world that he was dead. And he thought of writing to Watson, but always was afeared that Watson would blab. And this is where Watson takes offense.
Yeah, I thought I was at least as trustworthy as your brother. And Holmes is like, I was just using Mycroft for money. It's nothing to do with trust.
Well, he says, of course you are, Watson, but you have a kinder heart, which nice way to treat
Also, Mycroft has no friends and belongs to a club where the rules are that nobody talks to anybody.
Exactly. So this mollifies Watson somewhat, and he asks how Holmes has spent the last 3 years. You may have read of the remarkable explorations of a Norwegian called Sigerson. Holmes says he's traveled for 2 years. He went to Tibet, spending some time with the head lama. Of course, he was going to spend time with the head lama and not some, like, junior lama. Then he went to Persia and spent a short but interesting time with the Khalifa in Khartoum, the results of which I passed on to Lord Kitchener and the Foreign Office anonymously, of course.
And you had something about Lord Kitchener?
Yeah. So, okay, apart from the fact that the Kitchener stitch in securely binding off socks at the toes was his method of ensuring his soldiers didn't get trench foot, he was a monster who created concentration camps. And those of us who knit don't call it the Kitchener stitch anymore.
What do we call it?
There's some other kind of bind off. I forget. Because I don't do that bind off. I do a different one. It's even more.
I don't do it for socks because I do toe up socks, but I do it for other things that I can't recall at the moment because it's been years since I've had a sweater.
But he was instrumental in the Boer Wars of setting up concentration camps for the Boers and the Africans alike. And I mean, he was just a cruel and vicious man.
Yeah.
And Watson asks about this. You mean you actually saw the palace where Gordon was murdered? It was a sorry sight, a ruin, his blood still upon the staircase. So during the siege of Khartoum, which occurred over most of 1884.
Yeah, so for a little bit more background, Sudan was ruled by Egypt, which then afterwards came under British rule. And a revolt began in 1881 in Sudan. And succeeded against the British Army. The British didn't want to send reinforcements and appointed Charles Gordon as governor of Sudan with orders to evacuate Khartoum and the other garrisons.
Which he could not do because they were under siege.
Right.
And
but also he had stopped to address an assembly of tribal chiefs in Sudan and said, oh yeah, so Egypt is withdrawing its forces. And the tribal chiefs were like, well, why the fuck would we be loyal to you guys then?
Yes. Yeah. And the British backup arrived 2 days after Gordon was killed.
Yeah.
It was an absolute fiasco.
Yeah, Gordon arrived in Khartoum in 1884, and like you said, the other garrisons were under siege. But instead of evacuating, which was his orders, he wanted to free the other garrisons. So he tried to fortify Khartoum. He kept asking for England for more soldiers, and England was like, "Why do you need more soldiers to evacuate?"
Yeah, that wasn't the plan, dude.
Yeah, he tried a couple of times to send out soldiers for battle, and mostly just got them killed. The British press picked it up. Queen and Victoria got involved and ordered him to return to Cairo. And Gordon was all, "I will not abandon Khartoum." And England was finally like, "Fine, here's a relief force."
But they got there 2 days after he was killed.
Yeah, well, they had gotten into a couple of skirmishes with the rebel army, and there were a lot of casualties, but they did win. So the rebel army decided instead to turn to Khartoum. So they attacked the garrison, which had been under siege for about 10 months. They prepared for a 6-month siege.
Ugh.
They had food for 6 months, but additional 4 months had passed. So according to Wikipedia, the entire garrison was killed, along with thousands of the town's men, and many of the surviving women and children were enslaved. And according to one of Gordon's servants, Gordon fought on the stairs of the west wing of the palace, was wounded, and then decapitated.
Oh, well, hence the blood on the stairs.
Yeah, and it's why Holmes and Watson talk about it the way they do. Without saying, if he had just followed orders, this could have.
Or even if we had not stopped, been trying to colonize the entire northern Africa. But it was painted as a tragedy in the British media at the time, and blame was really being heaped upon Prime Minister Gladstone.
Yeah.
The
instead of Gordon, who was openly defying orders.
Right. But I mean, again, British tabloids have always been the same. So then Holmes moved on to France, researching into the coal tar derivatives. The coal tar derivatives.
Yeah, which you had you had a better note about than I did.
Apparently, coal tar derivatives were used for a variety of medical, applications, and one of them was as a cure for cholera. But another derivative acts promptly in rheumatism, and so-and-so thinks it's better than salicate of soda or Salol. And there's a pamphlet where there's like a whole list of the different derivatives of coal tar and how they can be applied to medical conditions. And then came the news of this most remarkable murder, which not only appealed to me on its own merits, but would seem to offer some most peculiar personal activities, whatever the hell that means.
Opportunities. Personal opportunities.
Oh, opportunities. Okay. Watson asks if he'd been to Baker Street, and we see Holmes in his own clothes, carrying a carpet bag and a leather suitcase. The sight of Holmes in his black, he's all dressed in black, carrying a carpet bag is just one of the most ludicrous. Just doesn't strike me as the carpet bag type. As he's unlocking the door at 221B, a man with a large mustache and a cigarette is watching him from across the street.
Yeah. Just before Holmes gets to 221B, I think it's like 2 doors over, we see him pass a shop with a sign that says shaving, haircutting, and ladies' room. We had talked about this just before recording. I mean, it could have been a room for ladies waiting for men who are getting this done. I don't think a barber would also be dealing with women's hair, but more likely what they're advertising is that they have a public restroom for women, which was public toilets for women were still a very new thing. It was still a huge subject for debate.
You mean women to that house?
Yeah, prior to that, women were on what they called a urinary leash, meaning you could only leave your house or go as far as your friends or family, as far and as long as your bladder would let you.
Good God.
Yeah. So this was very much a feminist issue, and it was something that the suffragettes
Yeah.
took up because not having public toilets means the activities of women are far more limited than they are for men.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like how in Saudi Arabia they can't leave the house unless they're accompanied by a brother or a husband or father.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and kind of these small little references to suffragism, I guess it's called, occur in the threads of both the stories and the show.
Yeah.
And this
because it was very much the part of the culture at the time.
Yeah, I mean, the level of detail of the show in making sure that type of thing was included is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
So yeah, this guy's watching him go into 221B. So Holmes goes inside. Mrs. Hudson sees his reflection in a mirror that she's passing, and the subtitles here just say whimpers and gibbers, which is accurate. She's just like all of Twitter. And Holmes embraces Mrs. Hudson.
Yeah, it's a very sweet scene.
It is. And again, a change in Holmes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think what Holmes is finding out through all of this is that he's deeply loved.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he's been a rude SOB up until now.
I still have the BBC Sherlock version in the back of my head to compare this to. I'm like, no, Granada Holmes is perfectly nice.
Yes.
What a lovely gentleman.
So he's relating to Watson. Mycroft had paid for the rooms to be left alone. And above the mantel is this large painting of the Reichenbach Falls, at which Holmes smiles. And he sits in his old chair. And he's missing the sight of Watson across the room in his chair. And Holmes asks if Watson still has his army revolver. Watson is to bring it with him that night. Holmes,
and Watson's like, I had somewhere.
Yeah, it's around here. Holmes says, I have a piece of work for us both tonight, which, if we can bring it to a successful conclusion, will in itself justify a man's life on this planet. And Holmes asks if he can take a nap on Watson's examining couch.
Yeah, on your couch. Like, it's just this cot.
It is, yeah, it's a cot. I mean, it's like an examining table.
Yeah.
And probably about as comfortable. It does not look comfortable. And Holmes falls instantly asleep.
Yeah, and Watson offers his bedroom, and Holmes is like, no, it's fine. I've had harder beds than this in the past few years. Like, okay, but the point is that you don't have to have this bad a bed.
Yeah, but this one is right here, right now, and I'm on it. So, and he does. He falls instantly asleep. Watson finds his revolver, and then he kind of tucks him in a little bit with the blanket.
Yeah, it's a very sweet moment.
We next see the pair in a hansom cab going through London that night. They get out and they walk through a cobblestone street past a stable. They're clearly in some kind of back alleyway. And
which really should have been more populated than it was.
Yes. Because the alleyway served a purpose.
Yeah. Life back then was lived on the streets in a way that's really hard for us to imagine these days. It's not like there was television people could watch. Most people didn't own books. Entertainment was outside the house.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and also alleyways were where the servants came out of the house to do like their dump stuff and whatever. Mm-hmm. So they go down some stone steps. They enter a building. The room that they enter in is covered in cobwebs and dust. There's a door with a broken window that leads to a staircase inside the house. And we hear that one of the stairs is creaky. And then they're upstairs in this building looking out over Baker Street. And Holmes says, we're in the empty house opposite our old quarters. So hence the title. Some men in opera cloaks, one has a blue silk lining, the other one has a red one, are passing by. Holmes asks Watson to go near the windows, but be careful not to be seen and to look into their old rooms. We will see if my 3 years of absence have entirely taken away my power to surprise you. At which point Watson grins and goes to the window, and he sees the silhouette of Holmes in the window opposite. And Holmes is a bit smug here. And he quotes Shakespeare. He says, I trust that age doth not wither nor custom stale my infinite variety. And he tells Watson that the bust is wax. He knows that the rooms are being watched, and he wants the watcher to think that he's at home. And Watson wants to know who's doing the watching.
Yeah, proving that he hasn't changed all that much.
And Holmes replies that it's the last remaining member of Moriarty's gang.
That guy was shooting at me at the Reichenbach Falls. And Watson's like, oh, right, that long story you were telling me earlier. Sorry, I drifted off after a while.
The man who had watched Holmes enter 221B was named Parker, a garroter by trade, and a remarkable performer upon the Jew's harp.
Yeah, which has nothing to do with the Jews. The name seems to be a corruption of Jaws harp. It's
Yes.
a weird little instrument. Like
You put it in your mouth and you pluck it, and it makes a boing sound.
yeah, like look at it under jaw harp on YouTube. It's an interesting.
Actually, is Chinese in origin.
Is it really?
Yes. But Holmes says he doesn't care about Parker or the Jew's harp. Instead, he cares about the person behind him, the bosom friend of Moriarty. This is the man who is after me tonight, and let us hope that he is totally unaware that we are after him. So they wait in the empty house for a while. Watson sees Parker and another man a few doors down from 221B. And then the silhouette in the window of 221B starts rotating. And we see that Mrs. Hudson, she's got this absolutely delicious smile on her face.
Yeah, because she's helping out Holmes, and also she's doubled his rent again because he's putting her in danger.
But she just loves it. And she's turning the bust around to face the window. In the 2 hours that they've been in the house, she's moved the bust 8 times. So it kind of like gives the impression that Holmes is alive and doing stuff. But then they hear that creaky step. So they hide around a corner. Watson takes out his revolver. We see a man in a cape. It's an opera cape with a high collar and a chain, but the collar is hiding his face. He's got patent leather shoes. This cape has a white silk lining. He goes to the window that they were just looking out of. He unscrews the top of his cane, and we're meant to believe, puts together out of the cane an air gun. And then the collar folds down a little bit, and we see it's Colonel Moran from the Bagatelle Club. He's putting the air gun together, and he's cocking it and aiming it out the window across the street at the silhouette. He shoots, and then Holmes yells, and he pounces on Moran.
And then immediately gets tossed over, and Moran starts strangling him.
Yes, but
Watson's there with his gun.
Yes, and he whacks him on the back of the head with his revolver. Lestrade comes bursting through the door with a detective, saying how glad he is to see Holmes. You seem to need some unofficial help. 3 undetected murders in 1 year won't do, Holmes says. and Lestrade doesn't care. He's just so happy that Holmes is back. Holmes tells the man that Moran is a crack shot. I believe I am correct, Colonel, in saying that your bag of tigers still remains unrivaled. I wonder that my very simple stratagem could deceive so old a shikari. A shikari is a warrior. Mm-hmm. How many times have you not tethered a young kid under a tree, lain above it with your rifle, and then waited for the bait to bring up your tiger? The empty house is my tree, and you are my tiger. The parallel is exact.
I will hear no criticism from English teachers. It's a perfect metaphor.
Marine bristles at this. And he really is he just looks like an evil villain with that jaw, that mustache. It's almost a very 1920s silent film. Yeah. And he asks what charge he's going to be facing. And Lestrade says, the attempted murder of Sherlock Holmes. But Holmes says, not so. He says that Lestrade is to take all the credit for the arrest of the murderer of Ronald Adair. He shot Adair through the open window from the rooftop across the street, just as he was about to do to Holmes. So
the evidence for that is
slim.
Yeah, not going to hold up in court, but sure.
So back at 221B, it's morning. Mrs. Hudson's clearing breakfast. Watson's praising her to the skies for her role in all of this. The bust has a big hole in the back of its head. And Mrs. Hudson was saying how terrified she was, and she's got a crick in her back from the crouching. And Holmes is looking for the bullet. And Mrs. Hudson asks him to hold her tray. And he kind of makes a little bit of a fuss about this, but he does. And then she pulls the bullet out of her pocket saying she picked it up off the carpet. Mrs. Hudson, you are becoming indispensable, Holmes says.
Becoming. Not you are, you're becoming.
Yeah, exactly. And he opens the door for her to take the tray out, which is a courtesy he might not have given her before. And somehow Holmes still has the air gun in his possession.
There's no way the police will need that for evidence of this
right?
other crime that is
and it's been modified, he says, to specifications that Moriarty had provided to a German named von Herder. The bullet went straight through the bust's forehead and out the back. Holmes asks Watson if he's heard of Moran before the murder of Adair, and Watson says no. So he asks Watson to bring him the L through N index of biographies.
Google him for me, will you?
Yes. So and then he like goes on about everybody who's under the letter M, but basically says Moran's been an honorable soldier, a crack shot, and somehow he began to go wrong. Without an open scandal, he still made India too hot to hold him, which is something given that there was absolute chaos in India.
Yeah, that was also Dr. Grimsby Roylott of Stoke Moran as well.
Oh, okay.
He also made India a little too hot.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
Holmes says there are trees that will grow to a certain height and then develop some eccentricity. You'll often find it in humans.
Yeah, a metaphor I still can't quite wrap my head around.
I assume it's like you get up to for some people you get to a certain position in life and then it starts to corrupt you, like power corrupts.
Oh, okay.
Is I assume what he was.
So Moran retired, came back to London, where he again acquired an evil name. Moriarty sought him out specifically, and Moran was with Moriarty in Switzerland, and he was the marksman who'd been shooting at Holmes after Moriarty fell to his death. And Watson says, basically, no wonder you disappeared with this kind of guy after you. And Holmes said, I watched the criminal news, and when I heard of the murder of Ronald Adair, I knew at last my chance had come. Knowing what I did, was it not certain that Colonel Moran had done it? He played cards with the lad, followed him home, and shot him through the open window from the rooftop opposite. Is there anything left for me to explain? At which point Watson puts on a fez. And I don't know why. Honestly, it's like,
Yeah. It's
big red fez with a tassel compound. And why is he wearing it?
Edward Hardwick was like, oh, hey, cool. Look what I found.
And Watson says he's curious about the motive. So Holmes kind of hoists himself up in his armchair and crosses his legs, crisscross applesauce, and says, there we move into the realms of conjecture, and asks if Watson has formed a hypothesis. Watson's lighting a cigar, and he says he has. Adair had discovered that Moran was cheating at cards. Very likely he spoke to him privately and threatened to expose him unless he voluntarily resigned from the club and promised not to play again. Exclusion from the club would mean ruin to Moran, who lived by his ill-gotten card games. Therefore, he murdered Adair. Will it pass? And Holmes says, I think without doubt you have hit upon the truth. It will be verified or disproved at the trial. Come what may. Colonel Moran.
Probably disproven because, like,
with no evidence.
Yeah, Holmes has the evidence. There's nothing linking Moran specifically to that particular scene.
Right. Come what may, Colonel Moran will trouble us no more. Okay, fine. And Watson says, and the air gun of von Herder will embellish the Scotland Yard Museum. I mean, they didn't even take prints. Mrs. Hudson knocks on the door. She brings in 3 glasses of champagne, and she gives the longest speech of her entire career. Once again, Mr. Sherlock Holmes is free to devote his life to examining those interesting little problems which the complex life of London so plentifully presents. And that's, Mrs. Hudson, done. She only has 2 words from here on out. She raises a toast to Sherlock Holmes, and the 3 clink glasses. And the episode ends.
Yeah, and the background for the closing credits is an illustration of the 3 of them clinking glasses.
It's
their hands clinking glasses.
It's because these kind of freeze frames are done in a Sidney Paget style.
Yeah,
I really love that aspect of the show.
Yeah.
So, according to Bending the Willow, it was at this point that Brett's health began to decline. The manic depression, or bipolar, as we call it now, began manifesting more severely. And I think we covered the fact that his wife had died in the previous episode. But yeah, we're about to notice more dramatic interjections from Brett in future episodes because he's on the upswing. And it's really hard for him to contain it.
Yeah.
So I just, you know, what I love about these episodes is all the history that's kind of just mentioned offhand that we're kind of supposed to know, and just digging deeper and into these tangents. That's the part that's really the most fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, because the stories don't hold up under inspection. Plot holes you could drive a truck through. But yeah, you know, all these different references are just so fascinating.
Yeah.
Did you have any other notes for this?
No, I forgot to put the closing to my notes.
Okay, so let's make it up.
I do have it.
Oh, okay.
I swear I prepared for this week.
Not editing this out. This is
The behind the scenes glimpse of, of what goes on here.
we're totally scattered.
Also, one of my cats ran off with my tea bag.
Oh,
Well, that's all from us this week. If you've enjoyed the show and haven't subscribed yet, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support us, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends. And join us next week when we'll be discussing the Priory School.
yay. The son of a duke. Hooray. Okay, well, we will see each other next week then.
Bye.
Bye.